Welcome back. If you've watched any number of my videos, you've seen this view before. This is my vise. Usually there's something set up in it by the time I turn on the camera. Well, today it's empty because I've just wrapped up a pretty big project in the hydraulic dump conversion of my truck. And after doing something big like that, sometimes it feels really good to go through and do a bunch of little stuff and knock some things out and shorten up my lists and that kind of stuff. So today the project is the vise. I'm sure you've heard this sound before. That's suboptimal. And entirely 100% my fault, let's be clear. I abused this vise. Shortly after I got it, I think I did a suspension job, and I don't have a press. So I used the vise as a press, and did things you're not supposed to do, like put a cheater bar on the handle, and massively overloaded it. Ever since then, that's been my reward. I did a little pokey parati shortly after it first happened and got stymied pretty quickly. I don't remember exactly what stopped me, but we'll see if combination of new shop, more tools, increased determination, what have you, gets me through the job. But it should be a pretty simple little teardown. Let's see what we can see. If you've ever wondered what this weird tube is on my bench next to my vise, it's my can crusher. That seems like a lot of play. So the screw is held together with roll pins. See that in there? The problem is they're going to be difficult to remove, because if I start hammering on it, it's just going to hit this casting. One on the tail of the screw I could drill through the casting. It wouldn't really hurt much, but pin on the head of the screw is here, and I'm not drilling through this. It's pretty long though. Maybe I'll try pulling it out first. It doesn't usually work, but nothing to lose by trying. Not a lot of room left to work with once the clamps are in there. Is that a better view? Let's see if I can do this with only one clamp. Is that actually working? Holy crap. Got it out. Smash the end of it flat, but I don't really care. Alright, let's try our luck at this other one. Is it moving? You got a better view than I do. Ooh, that feels good. Nice. Well, You see in there? Not really. Let's try something else. I was really expecting this to be one piece, but clearly not. Looks like that bolts down and was dead loose. Well, that's excellent news. I thought I was going to have some gnarly thread damage that I was going to have to try and smooth out or something. Not exactly sure how abuse loading caused that to get loose. It means after a little rework, this is probably going to work much better. This is wonderful German news. I need a vise to hold my vise parts in. They spared every expense at the machine shop. To be clear, that's not a complaint. I love cheap tools. I'm going through and filing the mating surfaces, and that does a couple of things. Cleans them and knocks down the high spots, kind of makes them flatter. That's sort of the obvious one. And you can deburr the edges and, it's material removal. You can do whatever you want with it. But the main reason I do it is actually as inspection. With a file, you can feel high spots really clearly to within whatever the flatness of your file is. So as you do a stroke across a surface, it feels very different when you're moving across a relatively smooth surface, even if you're touching high. You can see high spots in the shiny areas. This had some scalloping, some washboarding, whatever you want to call it. You can see lines traveling this way, and that means the surface had kind of a waviness. And so as I file it, the file is skating across the high spots and removing material. That's why it gets shiny. It's very clean. So even when it's not totally flat, if it's flat-ish like that, there's a very identifiable feeling to how the file feels as it goes across that. If there's a high spot, if this was dinged, in fact, I just cleaned it up, but we can do it again. If I center punch this, I don't know if you can see that on camera, but there's a punch there now. There's a spot. And when you center punch metal, it makes a volcano. If you have a flat surface like this, a center punch doesn't just make a divot. It displaces that material. It raises it either side and dimples it in the middle. So this spot there's a low spot and then an annulus of high spots. And when your file encounters those high spots, see if you can hear this. It makes a little bit of a different noise, but notably it feels very different. You can tell when you go from a file that's skating across a relatively flat surface to one that is just touching on a burr or a high spot. And so when you have something like this that's dirty and nasty looking, especially a vise, because as the wider the jaws are open, this part becomes exposed. And you can see there's dings and even there was a bit of weld spatter on right there. So this area is vulnerable to high spots. And you can look for them, you can feel for them with your hands, but I find a file is a great way to inspect for that kind of thing because you can just run across it and you feel a high spot. You focus on that high spot that you felt and you keep filing until you don't feel it anymore. And sometimes it can be very hard to tell what's high and what's low by looking at it, especially with the example of the center punch. When I'm done cleaning this up, there will still be a low spot. It will still look like it was center punch, but there will be a shiny ring where I've cleaned up all of the high material around it, and I'll be able to tell by feel with the file when that's done and when everything is taken down to a plane. I really like hand files for that application. It's more of an inspection step than it is actually a rework step, but you kind of get 2 for 1. And there, now that feels all good, and the high spots are cleaned up, and you can see the shiny ring around the divot. That was all that volcanoed up material is now gone. And so as the mating part This particular one's a bad example because the mating part only runs on the edges. The center is not touched. But as another piece of metal glides across that, even if it was full contact like this, it'll slide right across the low spot, and there are no high spots to impede its procession across that surface, and it'll run smooth. For a more precise application, you would use a stone instead of a file for this, but for most home workshop stuff, a file was plenty good. The last thing I'd like to do is replace these roll pins. I could put these back in. The flat's not going to hurt what they do, but I'd rather have screws. I think I'm going to drill those holes open and tap them and put in some screws so that I can remove them easier in the future. So a little trick for you. Tap size for any machine thread, any normal machine thread, imperial or metric, is the major diameter minus the thread pitch. So these are M4 by 0.7 socketed cap screws. 4 minus 0.7 is 3.3. 1/8 of an inch is 3.2. Close enough for the girls I go out with. Of course, I didn't even think to check. These are 1/8 inch roll pins, so no drilling required. It's really tempting to grease all of the mating surfaces in this, make it run just butter smooth. And it would for a week. And then all the sawdust and steel shavings and things would stick to the grease and everything would wear out faster. So I'm going to grease a couple of things, but I'm going to be real conservative with what I use. This is the main thrust washer, and it's pretty out of the way in terms of yunk that could get on it, and also it takes a lot of load. So it's going to get a thin film. So that's a little bit suboptimal because the bolt head and the bolt tail are slightly different sizes, so the washer sits at a bit of an angle, but it's just a preloaded spring, so I don't think that'll cause any issues at all. Oh, baby. It's like having a brand new vise. That is a win. Big improvement for the time spent, and feels good to tick something off a list that didn't take weeks. Looking forward to many more good years of service out of this vise. Next up, something else.